Rain hammered the streets in relentless sheets, turning gutters into rushing streams and drowning the city in a curtain of sound as Clara Mitchell finished locking up her small corner pharmacy for the night. She was just pulling her hood up when a faint, strangled groan reached her ears from the shadowed alley beside the shop. At first, she thought it might be a drunk from the nearby bar, but when she turned the corner, her breath caught. Slumped against the brick wall was a police officer, his dark uniform soaked in both rain and blood, his hand pressed weakly to his side. His skin was ghost pale, eyes fluttering open just long enough to whisper, "Help me," before his head dropped forward. Clara's training from her nursing days surged back, and she sprinted forward, crouching beside him, her fingers instantly finding the wound. The warm, sticky flow beneath her palm told her this man didn't have long. Without hesitation, she hooked her arms under his and dragged him toward her shop, her muscles screaming from the effort as rain plastered her hair to her face. Inside, she cleared the counter, laid him flat, and tore open her emergency medical kit, working quickly, cutting away fabric, dousing the wound with antiseptic, and stitching the deep gash with practiced precision despite his pained groans. When she asked what had happened, he managed only a strained, "Can't talk. Dangerous," before losing consciousness completely. She wrapped him in her coat and checked his pulse, steady but weak, relief washing over her just as a loud, deliberate knock rattled the front door. Her head snapped up, and through the rain-blurred glass she saw 3 men in hooded sweatshirts, their faces shadowed, eyes sharp. "We're looking for someone," the tallest said when she cracked the door, his voice low and edged with menace. "A cop. Seen him?" Clara's heart thudded painfully, but she forced her expression to stay calm, shaking her head. "No, just me here." For a long, dangerous moment they stared at her, as if weighing her words, then turned and melted into the storm. She locked the door instantly, leaning against it to steady her breathing, knowing without a doubt that whoever this officer was, he was in serious trouble, and by bringing him in, she had just made herself part of it. Clara woke on the pharmacy's floor with a stiff neck and the faint memory of dozing in the chair beside the injured officer, but when her eyes found the counter, he was gone, no blood, no coat, no trace, only a small note scrawled in shaky handwriting that read, "Thank you. Stay safe." She thought that was the end of it until 2 days later, when she arrived at work to find the front window shattered into jagged shards, the shelves ransacked, and red spray-painted letters screaming "Rat Lover" across the back wall. Her stomach twisted as she swept up glass, her hands trembling, and a part of her knew calling the police would only invite more trouble. The confirmation came faster than she expected. Her landlord showed up that afternoon, avoiding her eyes as he told her, "I can't have this kind of trouble here, Clara, your lease is terminated. You have a week." In the days that followed, her world unraveled. Her car tires were slashed twice in 1 week, her mailbox ripped from its post, and customers she'd served for years now crossed the street rather than greet her. Whispers followed her at the grocery store, rumors that she had helped a "dirty cop" on the run. Clara barely slept, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, the constant sense of being watched settling like a cold stone in her chest. One night, as she taped boxes shut in her small apartment, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, slow and deliberate, stopping just outside her door. Her heart seized, she gripped a kitchen knife, tiptoeing toward the peephole, braced for the sight of one of those hooded men from that night. Instead, she saw 2 uniformed police officers, one older with a weathered face, the other younger but just as serious, standing quietly, the older one holding his hat in his hands. When she cracked the door, he spoke in a calm, steady tone. "Ma'am, we need to talk about what happened that night." For a moment, she considered slamming the door, afraid that talking to them would only make her situation worse. But there was something in his eyes, something that told her he knew far more than she did, that made her step aside and let them in, unaware that the truth they carried would change everything. The 2 officers sat at Clara's small kitchen table, steam curling from untouched mugs of tea as rain tapped against the window, their presence filling the room with a quiet gravity. The older man introduced himself as Sergeant Blake, his partner as Officer Ruiz, and after a brief, heavy pause, Blake said, "The man you helped was Detective James Carver, an undercover officer in the middle of the most dangerous operation this department has ever run. Clara blinked in disbelief, memories of his pale face and trembling voice replaying in her mind as Blake continued, explaining that Carver had been deep inside the Marlowe crime ring for over a year, gathering evidence that could bring their entire empire down. That night, Ruiz added, his voice low, he was ambushed after obtaining the final piece we needed, records tying the boss to multiple murders and trafficking charges. If you hadn't stopped the bleeding, he wouldn't have lived long enough to pass that evidence to us. Clara's relief at finally knowing the truth was quickly swallowed by anger. Then why didn't he tell me? Why let me think he was just another wounded man in trouble? Blake's eyes softened. Because the moment anyone knew the truth, they became a target. He thought disappearing would keep you safe, but it's clear that plan failed. Clara clenched her hands in her lap, the weight of the past week pressing heavier than ever, realizing she had been caught in a storm she didn't even know existed. Ruiz slid a small folder across the table. Inside were photographs of the men who had come to her door that night, their faces hard, eyes dead. They're part of the Marlowe crew. They've been watching you, he said. But with Carver's evidence, we're about to move on them. Blake leaned forward then, his voice firm but kind. You can go into protective custody. We can hide you until this is over. Clara stared at them, the idea of running making her stomach twist. She didn't want to live in the shadows, afraid of every knock at the door. No, she said finally, her voice steady despite her fear. I'm not hiding. I want my life back. Blake studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. Then come with us tomorrow morning, there's something you need to see. The next morning, Clara rode in the back of a patrol car with Sergeant Blake and Officer Ruiz, the city sliding past in a blur of gray stone and wet asphalt until they pulled up in front of the downtown police precinct. The moment she stepped through the glass doors, the hum of activity seemed to pause, phones still rang, papers shuffled, radios crackled, but every uniformed officer in sight turned toward her, their conversations falling silent. One by one, they rose from their desks, lined the hallway, and stood at attention. Clara froze, unsure what was happening, until the sharp, unified sound of dozens of hands snapping to salute filled the air. At the far end of the corridor, a figure stepped forward, Detective James Carver, upright despite the lingering stiffness in his posture, a faint smile breaking across his face. He approached slowly, the salute still holding behind him like a wall of respect, and when he stopped in front of her, his voice was warm but steady. Because of you, Clara, we took down the entire Marlowe crime ring last night. Every single one of them is in custody. You didn't just save my life, you saved countless others in this city. Clara blinked rapidly, her throat tightening as he reached into his pocket and produced a small, gleaming medal, pressing it gently into her palm. This is the highest civilian honor we can give, he said, but it doesn't come close to what we owe you. Around them, the officers lowered their salutes, but their eyes stayed on her, some nodding, others smiling faintly, all carrying the same unspoken promise that she would never be left unprotected again. Clara felt the weeks of fear, isolation, and loss begin to lift, replaced by a quiet, overwhelming sense of belonging. She had lost her business, her home, and her sense of safety, all because she couldn't walk away from a man bleeding in the rain, but in that moment, surrounded by the men and women who now stood as her shield, she realized she had gained something far greater. The unshakable respect of an entire police force, and the knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing, no matter the cost, is what makes a person truly unbreakable.